If you have done a bit of a deep dive into the world that is mechanical keyboards, you might know that there are so many options and so many things to consider. I'm here to provide an overview for you, so you'll have an easier time selecting the components for your next custom mechanical keyboard build. The key talking points of this video will be: what size keyboard do you want? What additional features do you want it to have? What components are required and how do you pick these? We're going to go over some extra equipment you might need, and we're also going to be looking at some additional mods you can use to make your keyboard sound even better. Because the video is split up into chapters, you can go down to the description and click on the timestamp for the part of the video that you require most. Let's get into one of the most easy questions you have to ask yourself. What size keyboard do you really want? If you're interested in an even quicker overview of the keyboard sizes, then follow me on TikTok. I showcase tech products and short form content there. There are many keyboard sizes available on the market right now, but they might not all fit your needs. This is why I'm going to go over them one by one so you know what keyboard size fits you the most. Let's start off basic. A full-size keyboard. This is just your standard office keyboard. It has all the keys including a numpad, function keys and control keys. These are however very rare to come by in the custom mechanical keyboard scene. Next up we have an 1800 compact. This layout crams a numpad onto a 75% keyboard. These are however also pretty rare to come by. Now one of the more common boards is a TKL. TKL stands for 10 keyless. It is basically a full-size keyboard but without the numpad. If you are in dire need of a numpad, I'm looking at you avid Excel users, you might as well just get a separate numpad. You heard me mention it before, but this is a 75% keyboard. The 75% keyboard is very similar to a TKL, however it gets rid of some of the empty space on the board and also gets rid of some of the control keys. The next two layouts I'll be mentioning are the most common layouts in the mechanical keyboard scene. These are the 60 and the 65%. The 60% keyboard gets rid of the control, function and arrow keys. These are used a lot in the gaming scene as they are pretty compact and won't interfere with your mouse space. Now slapping some arrow keys on there will quickly convert it into a 65%, also a very popular size. The next one is a bit of a weird one. It's not seen often and it has a very long adjustment period. I'm talking about the 40% keyboard. It gets rid of all the numeric keys. From what I've heard, it takes a while to get used to. It is however very portable. And lastly, we have a macro pad or a numpad. The numpad kinda speaks for itself. This is a photo of a numpad to get some extra examples in there. A macro pad, however, is like the size of a numpad, but every key can be adjusted to your liking. You can have some keystrokes on there, for example. Now that you know what keyboard size fits you best, we're going to go into some additional features you might want on your keyboard. I'm going to be talking about two of them. These will be QMK and RGB. Starting with the latter, RGB is very common in gaming keyboards. However, it's also making its way into the custom mechanical keyboard scene. There's different types of RGB. You have side lights, underglow, and in-switch. In-switch may also be referred to as RGB per key or per key RGB. RGB per key refers to every key having its own set of LEDs. These lights are meant to shine through the keycaps, so if you're considering getting this, you might want to look into some shine-through keycaps or perhaps some pudding keycaps. Now these LEDs are soldered into the PCB. It is not generally advised to solder these in yourself, so make it yourself easy and just get a plate with those LEDs installed. Do keep in mind that it is difficult to come by PCB that supports both in-switch RGB and underglow. Speaking of underglow, the name basically says what it is. It will not be shining through the keycaps, but will be spilling out the bottom of your case. It is thus best matched with a acrylic or plastic case. You can see all the light cycle out. Now moving on to the second feature of this chapter. QMK. QMK stands for Quantum Mechanical Keyboard. This is a firmware that's a fork of TMK firmware. However, QMK being less complicated makes it so that it is more popular. Firmware is a set of instructions that is built into the keyboard's memory. It's how the PC knows what to do when the switch is pressed. Now with QMK, you can alter this. You can program every switch to do what you want. This could be a keystroke, a macro, or even switching to a layer with more additional keystrokes. If you want to use QMK, you're going to have to look through the product description of your PCB. Look for something that says QMK or VIA compatible. Look thoroughly though, as not a lot of boards actually support this. Now you know exactly what you want your keyboard to do. We're going to move on how to actually make it happen. The parts you need to build a custom keyboard. Properly picked parts are vital to giving you the typing experience that you're looking for. I'll make a quick summary of all the components that are needed to build a custom mechanical keyboard. These are a case, a plate, a PCB, stabilizers, switches, and keycaps. I'll be explaining these all one by one. However, I will be linking some timestamps in the description of this video. So if you already know everything about a specific component, you can just go down into the description and click the timestamp of the components you might want to learn something more about. We're starting off with the case, as this is what holds everything together. It also protects your components. There are three main concerns when picking out a keyboard case. These are size, material, and case mounting style. I'm brushing over size really quickly as I explained this earlier in the video. Obviously, you're going to want a case that fits the size that you want. We're moving on into materials. The three most commonly encountered case materials are plastic, aluminium, and acrylic. Plastic is the one you'll run into the most, as they are the cheapest and easiest to manufacture. They're budget friendly, but they might not be the best option in the long run, as they can be a bit wobbly, bad build quality might be in the picture, and they could also make quite a bit of sound. They can be rattly. If you want your keyboard to have a better build quality, to be a bit more sturdy, you're going to want to consider aluminum. Aluminum cases are obviously more heavy and more sturdy than the plastic counterparts. The quality of these cases drastically differs per manufacturer, so you're really going to have to put in some research. Now, acrylic cases are interesting, because technically they are plastic too. However, they feature a lot of properties that glass has. They're more see-through and more shiny than most plastic cases. These are perfect if you want to go for the RGB look, like for example with the earlier mentioned underglow. They do, however, tend to be more fragile, so make sure you do your research once again. The last part of keyboard cases that I'll be going over is mounting styles. There is a lot of mounting styles. I'll put a little infographic up on the screen right now. You can pause it if you want a detailed description of all of them. This way you can decide which one you like best. You will come across tray mounts the most, as once again, they are the cheapest and easiest to produce. However, within the custom keyboard community, gasket mounts are considered the best. This is because they are more dampening and also have a better feel to them. This is of course subjective. Moving on to the heart of your keyboard, the PCB. PCB stands for printed circuit board. To explain what the PCB does in very simple terms, it communicates with your PC. It tells the PC what to do whenever a switch is pressed down. There's three main types of PCB. These are standard, hot swappable, and through-hole PCB. They're not all equally as beginner friendly, so pay attention if you're new. Standard PCB will require you to solder in the switches yourself for it to properly function. This means that you can do some fun customization things like a split spacebar, or something more alternative, like this. Now, if you don't want to solder or are unable to, you're going to have to go for a hot swappable PCB. Hot swappable PCB is very beginner friendly. It's easy to set up and it's easier to change out your switches later. The way this works is that the pins on the switch are simply being pressed down into the holes of the PCB. You're going to want to make sure your PCB is compatible with your switch type, by the way, as switches have 3 or 5 pins. You can find whether a PCB is compatible with the switch type in the product descriptions. Lastly, we have through-hole PCB. This is not beginner friendly whatsoever, as it requires you to solder in everything. I'm talking controllers, USB ports, everything. Definitely don't do this if you're building your first mechanical keyboard. If you are more experienced, however, this might be a fun challenge for you. Moving on to the plate. While the plate is not necessary for your build to function, it does provide a lot of sturdiness and helps with the build quality. It helps hold everything together, as well as provide some support or sturdiness to the switches so that they wobble less. There are many materials to choose from in this, like steel, carbon fiber, or aluminum. A lot of people swear by different materials, but I haven't seen a specific one stand out. Sometimes a plate comes with either the case or the PCB. It is very important that these are compatible, otherwise it will simply not fit. Now, stabilizers. Stabilizers prevent your bigger keys like the enter or spacebar from wobbling. Once again, there's 3 types: plate mounted, screw in, and snap in. Starting with the best, these are screw-in stabilizers. As they are screwed in directly into the PCB, they will give you the most stable experience. Next, the most commonly encountered one. This is plate mounted. These attach to the metal plate above the PCB, so they don't give the best typing experience. And lastly, we have the snap in. They aren't as sturdy as the screw-ins, but they provide an okay typing experience. And once again, make sure the stabilizers you pick are compatible with your PCB. And this is where it becomes fun. Keyboard switches. Switches are where the options spiral out of control. There are too many switches to consider them all. I'm going to go over the 3 main types of switches though. These are linear, tactile, and clicky. Linear switches opt for the most smooth and quiet experience. They don't feature haptic feedback and will make as minimal sound as possible. Now moving on to tactile switches, they feature little bumps so that you're certain you push the switch. They make some sound, but they aren't too loud, opposed to the clicky switches. The name says it all. These are loud. They also tend to require more force to be pushed down as the resistance of the switch is a bit higher. These are used mostly by typists, as it is very certain that you press the switch due to the loud. As I said before, there are so many options with keyboard switches that it is impossible for you to consider them all. You can go really in depth and find the best activation force that suits your needs perfectly. However, for most people it's enough to go off the generally encountered colors. I'll give you a quick overview. Blue switches tend to be the clicky switches. Green switches oftentimes feature a clicky or tactile switch. Brown switches are almost always tactile switches. Red and yellow feature the linear switches, and so do silver and black. However, silvers opts for more speed, specifically targeted towards the gaming community. The black switches require more force to be pushed down. They are, however, still a linear switch. Please keep in mind that these are loose guidelines. The colors I just mentioned may differ from the ones that you encounter while browsing the web, and there are many more colors out there. So make sure to read the description of the switch you are buying so that you are certain you're getting the right type. The last component of your custom keyboards to finish it all off, to create the perfect look, the keycaps. Once again, so many options. I'm going to sum it down for you, and there's only a few things you need to consider. This is material, profile, design, and manufacturing method. Starting off strong with the material, keycaps are often made out of ABS or PBT. PBT being the more high-end option, as it is more durable. This doesn't mean ABS is out of the picture. Some people prefer ABS as they have less imperfections. Next up is profile. There's two categories, which are uniform and sculpted. When we say uniform keycaps, we refer to all keycaps being the same height. A great example of this is the Apple Magic Keyboard. You'll run into sculpted keycaps a whole lot in the mechanical keyboard scene though. We have sculpted keycaps so that you don't have to stretch your finger as far while typing to make the experience better. In the category of sculpted keycaps there is many different types. I will go over these very briefly. OEM, this is the keycap profile that you'll find on most keyboards. These are mass-produced and considered standard. They have an angled top. Next up is the cherry profile. It's very similar to the OEM profile but a bit shorter. It's a very popular layout, especially in gaming. The DSA profile is a slightly shorter profile with a spherical top, and the XDA profile is a medium height profile with a spherical top. Now the SA profile keycaps are a tall high profile with a slightly spherical and angled top. This is going to be a quick one. Design. This just comes down to preference. What color do you want? What print do you want? What do you want it to look like? What matches your aesthetic? Go all out. This is yours. Unless it's this one. Don't get this one. Next up is manufacturing methods. This refers to how the keycaps are made and how the legends are displayed on them. Legends are the characters on your keycaps, by the way. I don't want to talk about this for a long time as most people don't really care. The most popular one is double shot. Double shot means that two colors of plastic are being poured into a mold. One color will be the legend, so the number or letter displayed on your keycap, and the second layer will be the keycap itself. This method is the most popular as it ensures that the legends are pretty durable. They don't wear off too quickly. They are also more expensive, so that is a thing to consider. Now I could go over things like pad printing, UV printing, or laser edging, but most people don't really care. There's one type of keycap that I do want to mention in particular. Those are the artisan keycap. These are oftentimes handmade, custom keycaps that are very special. You have them in all types of designs, from your favorite shows to your favorite games, to whatever you might want. These are considered collector's items by some as they sometimes drop in very limited quantities. We have now gone over all the components you need. However, to actually assemble this keyboard, you might need some extra tools. This brings us to, what extra equipment might you need? If you're going to go for a PCB that requires soldering, you're going to need some soldering tools. This includes things like solder wire, a soldering iron, and a solder sucker to fix up those little mistakes you might make. Two things that always come in handy will be a switch puller and a keycap puller. This ensures that you won't damage the parts or your fingers while removing or replacing them. A tool that comes in really handy is screwdrivers in different sizes. These are used to, for example, screw the stabilizers in or screw the PCB into your case. Now, there is some equipment you might need if you're doing some additional molds. This could include band-aids, lube, or foam. Which is a perfect segue into our next chapter. What additional modifications can you make to your keyboards to reduce the sound? The search for the perfect keyboard has been an endless quest so far. There are, however, some things you might want to do if you want to improve the sound and feel of your keyboard. I'll be showcasing a few of the most popular keyboard mods. Keep in mind, there are many more, so feel free to add on to this in the comments. Firstly, lubing. By adding lubricant to the moving parts of your switches, you can reduce friction and make the key press more smooth and quiet. The lube that is used most commonly is Krytox 105 or Krytox 205G. The way you lube these switches is by opening up the switch with a switch opener and getting all the separate parts together. For example, throwing all of the springs into a little baggie, adding some lube and shaking that. You will have an easy way to lube all the springs at the same time. For the other parts of the switch, like the stem and the housing, you are recommended to use a tiny paintbrush. Don't lube clicky switches though, as it may get rid of the clicky sound that you bought them for in the first place. Lubing can also be done to the stabilizers. Speaking of stabilizers, we're going to get into the band-aid and the clipping mold. The clipping mold is very simply just clipping the legs of your stabilizers. This makes it so that you reduce the noise the stabilizers make when hitting the PCB when pressed down. Now, if you combine this with the band-aid mold, which is getting a tiny bit of band-aid and placing it on the PCB where the stabilizers are located, you will reduce the sound drastically. And last but not least, a relatively quick upgrade depending on your PCB and case, the foam mold. Cutting up some foam and placing it on the bottom of your case underneath the PCB can help dampen the echo in your keyboard. Keep in mind that the difficulty of this mold really depends on what components you have, as some PCBs will have you remove all the switches before being able to install the foam. And that's basically all I had to say. This is my first video on mechanical keyboards and I've tried my best to do all the research I can. Obviously I'll be missing some things or might have phrased some things wrong. Feel free to let me know in the comments, I would love to hear what you think.